5 years in Vanuatu, I have seen a lot of adaptation. Some of it has been hugely successful. So one example of successful locally led adaptation that was invented by my friend Salome Calo, she started doing backyard solar food dryers, which now have stored tons of fresh fruit as in its dried form that feed villagers during the numerous cyclone disasters that we face in our island. But I've also seen many examples of adaptation failures. One example was an internationally led program that was trying to curb the spread of malaria, and they did so by cutting endemic vegetation away from the sides of creek and swampy areas on the island. And as you can imagine, the next big rainfall event we had led to huge runoff and flooding because they had cut this vegetation. So this is a perfect example of maladaptation, and it's very commonly led by international experts who don't take into account local knowledge. Adaptation is not an exact science, and the international experts certainly do sometimes get it wrong, particularly when local people and communities haven't figured into the decision-making process or implementation in a meaningful way. And this really gets at the heart of locally led adaptation and the 8 principles that we're going to be discussing today. So the IPCC and its AR6 report, which in our view is the most comprehensive and robust assessment of science that we have, makes it clear that engagement is the key for successful adaptation, local engagement. The logic is so simple but maddeningly elusive. Local ownership equals higher rates of successful adaptation. But unfortunately, right now, less than 10% of the finance from global climate funds is actually going to local action. And in disaster-wrecked countries like Vanuatu, less than 2.5% of the humanitarian aid is actually going to local actors. And this has to change. And that is why it's so important that we keep this concept of locally led adaptation front and center in all spaces where adaptation to the climate crisis is being discussed, particularly as we are negotiating right now the global goal on adaptation at COP28. So Vanuatu and more than 100 national governments and international institutions and local and international NGOs have now endorsed formally these 8 principles of locally led adaptation. And let me say from experience that this has not been easy. We have backed up this endorsement with quite a lot of hard work. We have, for example, revised and enhanced our nationally determined contribution to include 116 new adaptation commitments, almost all of them empowering local approaches. We've also, this year in 2023, allocated 15% of our national budget space to addressing climate change impacts and adaptation. And right now, in fact, this week, we're reviewing our highest development policy, the National Sustainable Development Plan, to refocus all of our efforts on locally determined and context-specific decentralized action. And of course, you may have heard about Vanuatu's initiative right now to ask the International Court of Justice to bring much needed clarity on states' obligations to help vulnerable people adapt and stay protected from climate harm. So Vanuatu is fully into this fight. And we are standing shoulder to shoulder with all the other governments and institutions that have endorsed these locally led adaptation principles, and anybody really who's ready to protect the human rights and health of this planet. So if Vanuatu, which is one of the most climate vulnerable countries on this planet, can bring this level of locally led adaptation ambition, so too can any state. For us, adaptation action, which is locally led, has literally become a lifeline for us. And my hope, and Vanuatu's hope, is that at COP28, we will start to see some of those laggard states be ready to stand up and finally allow the breakthrough that's required with meaningful solutions across all systems and sectors, and the prioritization of locally led adaptation as an essential focus of finance and an essential focus of technology and inclusive partnerships. And so the big question that we have to global leaders, and in fact, the question that we may have to all of us today is, are you ready to join with high ambition states like Vanuatu and really be willing to directly enable and empower local level stakeholders who are already taking the adaptation action that's required? And are you willing to join us in endorsing these 8 principles for locally led adaptation? Vanuatu's indigenous people want a voice in adaptation decisions, and they want a role in implementing adaptation action, but they want that voice for all people everywhere in developed and developing countries. And for Vanuatu, locally led adaptation, summarized in these 8 principles that we're going to discuss today, really is an example of climate just and cooperative approaches that are essentially required to keep this planet safe for humanity. So thank you very much, and enjoy the discussions today.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Christopher. I'm sure if we were all in a room, there would be a very loud round of applause for that opening speech, which I think hopefully everyone will agree has really set the context and the scene for why we're here. And just a few things before we go into a little bit of interaction with you all. A couple of things that you raised there. I mean, there was so much in that presentation, from the discussion about the finance and how much reaches the local level, but really your point right at the end there about that call for action, as your call to say, are you ready? Are you ready to step up and work with countries such as Vanuatu to empower and enable local communities to be at front and center of the solutions and to endorse the principles for LLA? I think that's a fantastic call, and I loved your point about the hard work that had gone on as well in Vanuatu in backing up, not just endorsing the principles, but also living them and putting them into action. And I think that's a really great kind of framing. It's really kind of capturing what we were hoping to get to today, just to hear a little bit more about some of the ways in which people are trying to do that. So thank you for starting us off with that great presentation. What I'm going to do very briefly now is 2 things. Firstly, I realise I forgot to say at the beginning that the meeting is being recorded. And I know there's been an ask in the chat, so please do note that is being recorded. As I say, please do put comments, questions, etc. into the chat where you would like to raise things that hopefully we can take to the various speakers. But before we get into our first dialogue, excuse me, I'm going to ask everyone to log into the Mentimeter. So I'm hoping someone will, here we go. So can everyone see there is a QR code, but if you can all go to menti.com and then put in the code 51113240. I think I've read that correctly. I haven't got my glasses on, so apologies. And the first question, we really wanted to just gauge, I suppose, the awareness, the knowledge that was pre-existing amongst the audience of the LLA principles. So hopefully this is quite a quick question for you all, just to get us thinking and give us as the people speaking a sense as to the degree of awareness in the room. So I'll just give everyone a minute to do that. And if you are struggling with the Mentimeter, please don't worry. Please, where you can use it, fantastic. If it's difficult, it's not working, and you'd like to put something in the chat and that's easier, please use that. But we hopefully this is relatively straightforward, but recognise that it can be difficult at times to connect. Fantastic. So it looks like from those reactions that we've got a good split of people. We've got a lot of knowledge and awareness of the principles in the room, so that's fantastic. For those who are less familiar, again, please do feel free to ask questions throughout this discussion using the chat function. We've got a lot of, as I said, we've got a lot of experts on this call who we hope can help answer those and give more clarity as needed. They may well do that in the chat as well. So maybe we can move on to the second question. We've got 3 questions for you at the start. So this is a little bit longer, and it's around the evidence that you think is needed to help essentially do what Christopher said and to put the LLA principles into action. What do you need to know more of? What would help? I'll give you a few minutes to answer this one because it requires probably a little bit more writing. Fantastic. So we're getting quite a few things coming in now. And just to say, at the end of the session, we will obviously try and capture some of this in a short summary of the key points. But there's obviously things around here around monetary value of LLA investments. What does it look like in practice rather than in theory? What are the really practical examples? There's something here around, I think linked to that, around case studies. So again, more kind of practical examples of where the principles have been put into use. But also I think an important point around what the challenges are, what the barriers are, what makes it hard. So I think this is something I'm hoping the panelists later might want to reflect on some of these as well. So that's great, and I'm sure that you please do feel free to keep adding more as we go through the discussion. But really helpful to start to see some of these questions coming forward. And so that we've got more time for discussion with the panelists, can I move to the third question, which is around whether you've got an example of what applying the principles looks like for you, or how you're trying to do that in different ways, or how you plan to do it. So please do share, because it perhaps might help with some of those questions in the earlier slide around practical examples. So I'll give you a minute to answer these. So this is great. I can see things coming in here around tools such as open budgets. I know in IIED we have experience of using that, and we're slowly growing that experience across a range of investments. I can see Life AR, for those who don't know about Life AR, sorry, the LDC initiative for effective adaptation and resilience. You may hear it referred to through the course of this call, so helpful that that's been put on there. I've got providing small grants, so the kind of mechanisms to enable that funding to reach the local level. Mainstreaming LLA, I think that would be really interesting to perhaps tease a little bit more into that and understand how people are addressing the mainstreaming. And the program design, interesting point there about the earlier engagement, the earlier way of working with partners and relationship building. And a lot of these tally very much with those 8 principles and previous conversations, I think, that some people have been involved in. So that is fantastic. I think there's a really rich set of examples coming through. As I said, what we're going to try and do is hopefully this gives the panelists, the speakers, a few points that they may want to reflect on as they come in shortly. But also we will be putting together a summary of some of these points in terms of both the kind of the evidence gaps or needs, and also this kind of what people are already trying to do or interested in doing. So this is fantastic as we help work with the community to take this forward. So thank you very much for your participation there. I'm sure if we were all in a room, we'd have post-it notes everywhere and it would be full of energy. So I hope you're feeling energetic in your virtual kind of post-it notes. I'd like to start now by we're going to move to a first dialogue really between a couple of core kind of colleagues on this agenda, who are going to talk a bit about 2 of the big moments during the year for those who are very active in the locally led adaptation space. They are part of a learning journey where people come together, they share experience, they talk about challenges and opportunities. And essentially what we wanted to do was just hear a little bit directly from 2 of the big events and discussions that have already taken place this year, to hear from those who've directly involved in implementing LLA, what some of the messages were that came out of these 2 events. The 2 events being Gobeshona, which takes place, I would say, in Bangladesh, but it's now remote, it's virtual, you can all join. When I first went to Bangladesh, it was, I think, one day. It is a mega event. I will let ICCCAD, I will let Sara introduce a little bit more about that. And then I'm also going to move on to Sushila, who is going to talk to the second event that was held quite recently in Bangkok, which was the Community-based Adaptation Conference. So I'm going to ask them both to speak for 5 to 7 minutes each, and then hopefully if you've got questions, please put them in the chat and we'll try and pose those and put them to the speakers for their reflections and comments. So if I can ask Sara, if you'd like to go first, and just over to you for some of the messages from CBA. Please do introduce yourself and look forward to hearing what your messages are.
Thank you. So good afternoon, everyone. This is Sara from the International Center for Climate Change and Development. I'm currently in Dhaka, and we are actually celebrating the Eid al-Azha here. So Eid Mubarak, everyone. Hope you all have a blessed day. So today I'll be sharing the key messages from the third annual Gobeshona Global Conference. Many of you may or may not be familiar to the conference. So let me start with a brief introduction to what the conference is actually about and what could be expected out of it. So Sam, could you go to the next slide, please? Yeah, so the term Gobeshona is actually the Bangla term for research, and we have been hosting the Gobeshona Global Conference for years in person. Before the large COVID outbreak in 2019, we had to shift the conference virtually. Hence, we now call it the Gobeshona Global Conference, as we now not only have Bangladeshi researchers and organizations associated with it as our partners, but also renowned climate enthusiasts from around the globe. We provide a platform for to share their ongoing research where they put the LLA principles into action. And this year, the conference aimed to link local and the international researchers, scholars, policymakers, and practitioners to participate, support, and leverage the upstanding intentions and creativity of local communities aiming to develop and implement solutions dealing with climate change, as well as monitor the progress they have made so far. In order to do so with inclusivity, we have been inviting all communities and groups and encourage them to spread their learnings, for which we do not have any participation fee or any other associated fees to host or attend sessions. The conference this year also aimed to address the quality of research and taking initiative to give research a real meaning, so that publication becomes effective in response to climate impacts and locally led adaptation by encouraging constructive discussion and feedback among researchers. So next slide, please. So in total, we had around 72 sessions over the period of 7 days, where we had sessions from themes like climate finance, youth and gender, adaptation technology, and many more, as you can see on screen. Next slide, please. We're able to pull off the conference successfully with support from our supporting and governmental partners, and of course, our session partners, who made it possible that we shared the key messages of the conference here today. So amongst all sessions, I'll be sharing the 6 key messages which align perfectly with the goal of the conference. Next slide, please. So firstly, the session on climate finance hosted by UNDP and UNCDF emphasized that we promote innovative climate finance tools, advocating for locally led approaches to climate adaptation and implementing risk insurance and transfer instruments to enhance resilience, while introducing a social protection scheme for climate vulnerable households. For instance, climate finance models like the Community Resilience Fund and performance-based climate resilience grant are contributing to resilient communities, institutions, and infrastructures in Bangladesh. Logic, on the other hand, has developed a climate vulnerability index at the union level. It enabled the government to create a national database that maps the country's climate vulnerabilities and adaptive capacities, which can be used for climate vulnerability-based development, budget allocation in the local government institutions. Another important theme this year was, of course, the locally led adaptation, which was the overarching theme of the conference. The GCA, Global Center on Adaptation session, pointed out that communities are essential to the creation and use of climate-related data and information, which should be recognized and used to guide local, national, and international initiatives, as they have the ability to turn huge data into useful information and promote its disseminations. However, it's crucial to address the inequity whereby communities that are severely affected by climate change and in need frequently encounter tedious procedures to receive climate finance while not having the funds for rapid adaptation initiatives. So this session shared a unique strategy of using assumptions about future population emissions or economic conditions. A rough scenario was developed, which was then used to produce a general circulation model that predicts future climate variables. And this map is actually designed with the help of the local communities to identify and present issues to local government, NGOs, and political leaders, seeking answers and assistance in obtaining the solutions required for those problems. Another very important session was hosted by IIED on adaptation technology, where it was beautifully brought out that understanding the matrix for measuring the previous slide, please. For measuring locally led adaptation is crucial for effective funding allocation, as different categorizations of local can impact resource distribution, assessing resilience capacities across projects and adopting strategies based on identified shortcomings can enhance climate change response. Grant funding should prioritize local needs and priorities, supporting subnational adaptation actions and integrating nature-based approaches into conservation initiatives. So yes, for instance, the session brought out that USAID's funding for local partners will be influenced by how they define local, aiming for at least 25% direct assistance by 2025 and a leading role for local communities in 50% of assistance by 2030, comparing approaches 11.1% and 5.7% of funding were found to go to local organizations across 10 countries using USAID and PWYF's criteria respectively. Another study on GCS funded projects and programs support adaptation at the subnational or local level in African states, showed that grant funding will remain a vital instrument for supporting adaptation actions, especially at subnational level. So then we had a heated discussion at the session hosted by the Scottish government, IIED and GRP, where the urgency to pay for loss and damage was brought out. This discussion encouraged to chase a wide range of options, securing funding from numerous sources and adjusting actions. So considering both the economic and non-economic losses, giving priority to innovative funding strategies and appreciating the value of community involvement in decision making and to support the most vulnerable communities, it is necessary to address the immediate effects of losses and damages. So groups like the Loss and Damage Youth Grant Making Council and the Bolivian Uru people are setting an example by taking charge and actively being part of the decision making. So yeah, the session on deltas hosted by IRI, CIMIT, and Living Deltas Hub, and of course the Wageningen University brought forward the Bangladesh Delta Plan promotes water and food security, economic growth, sustainability, and food governance while addressing climatic problems in the Delta area. Fostering workplace inclusion and accepting remote work both have benefits, and great leadership is which drives organizational change and diversity. So this session proposed that the agriculture productivity and resilience in Bangladesh's coastal region can be increased if nature-based solutions like ecosystem intensification and foreign irrigation are implemented. On the other hand, benefits of organic farming like the one they practice in the Mekong Delta includes individual farms, organic agriculture cooperatives, and private businesses and rice export businesses. The farmers receive support from the government, NGO, social enterprises, and international organizations, and are highly benefited from the cultivation. That brings us to the end of my presentation. So thank you. I'm open to answer any questions. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Sara. Thank you for that set of key messages. In the interest of time, I'm going to hand straight over to Sushila, and then hopefully we'll have a few minutes to take some of the questions which are in the chat. So Sushila, please, over to you on the CBA.
Thank you so much, Helen. And hello, everyone, and welcome to this London Climate Week program on locally-led adaptation. And I will be discussing about the CBA 17 conference that we organized on Bangkok this year. After 4 years of online, 3 years of online event, this was the 4th year. We met physically on Bangkok from 25th to 22nd to 25th May. And it was a big crowd. Can we move to the next slide, please? It was a big crowd of more than 250 people from 50 different countries. Sorry, I didn't introduce myself. I'm Sushila Pandit. I was the co-chair for the program group of CBA this year. And also I'm a long-term climate adaptation practitioner and currently doing my PhD on climate policies and governance in University of Kent. If people in the room who are not aware of CBA is the Community-based Adaptation Conference, and this is an annual conference of practitioners. So it's around 250 people, climate adaptation practitioners from around normally 50 to 60 countries come together and discuss about how we enhance the community-based adaptation, moving towards now enhancing locally led adaptation. After I have already mentioned, after the 3 year of online conference, this was the first time we organized it physically, and it was a lot of discussion, tough discussions and interesting conversations. And the key messages were, you can see the hall, the key message was full on the hall. So it was really tough to pull only key 5 messages, but I will try to pull that on 5 minutes time. On CBA, this year we introduced decolonizing climate action as a theme. Apart from the regular theme we have, I will go through the theme, each of the themes. So this was a very interesting concept raised by the practitioners and was much more engaged on the conversation throughout the CBA. We felt that as well, and people were demanding special sessions online through as well on decolonizing climate action. The decolonizing climate action's key messages were to recognize the value of the indigenous and local knowledge, in the context, the environment, the politics and the marginalization, and challenging the colonial legacies, how the funds are transferred from the big countries to the said global south. There were debates on people on saying like we are already having this colonial mindset because of the word global north and south. We need to come through different versions of the terminologies for even mentioning these countries, because that is also creating a decolonizing world. And then also to build on the direct relationships between the funder and the local organizations by fostering dialogue and understanding, because the bridge in between may not understand or translate the same messages that the community want directly to the funders and the donors. And the funding program need to allow for adaptive management, which was also raised on the Gobeshona conference that Sara shared, and need to allow for adaptive management and also room to fail, because most of the time it's always like we share wonderful experience, good examples, but the story behind failures are even more learning opportunities. So we should have room for like open discussion on failing and moving ahead and learning from it. So they are now currently restrictive. So we need to be having a funding mechanism which is open to this kind of conversations as well. Our other 4 different themes which was carried forward from last year's CBA as well was nature-based solution. On nature-based solutions, the discussions were around, like we have talked a lot about nature-based solutions, and now we need to move from policy into practice on nature-based solutions, and also don't tokenize nature-based solutions. For example, just having parks and ponds on urban space and call them that we have done some nature-based solution. So just branding that as nature-based solution, we need to move ahead of it. So that was a big message coming from the practitioners on CBA. And involvement of multiple stakeholders, because NBS itself is a wider concept which needs coordination and support from multiple institutions, from community to engineers, from scientists to government. So everybody should come on place to design and implement these nature-based solutions. And Christopher from Vanuatu also mentioned how local knowledge matters. So it was a big key message on CBA as well, that we need to prioritize local knowledge, and then also to have local governments leading it, and exclude this as a vital resource. On climate finance, it was really an interesting sessions on risks, because who is taking the risks was the major key question on finance. So normally we assume that the risks and burdens are taken by the big organizations, but the discussion encouraged that the risks is actually taken by the local organizations who are carrying the reputational risks as well to perform on the ground, and other risks like personal risks, like taking money where there is no banks and anything. They carry the fund with them and organize events. So that should be respected, and that should be trusted as well. Trust was the other big word coming multiple times on CBA. So sharing the burden of the risks was one of the key finance discussions as well. And working with the existing government system, because we know that if we don't work with the system and we don't stay on the system, we don't continue with it, it is a one-off event. So a program comes and move out, but we will not have a systemic change on the thing. So although we know, like, however flawed or there is problems on the system, we need to work together and fix the issues and move ahead, rather than creating different systems and moving ahead with that. And the other major thing was flexibility for local organizations, because there are a lot of protocols and documents to be made on to get a grant, which is a very tedious job for a local organization to bring on. So that makes a local organization not reaching out to a big fundings. So that was one of the finance must allow the adaptive management, and also less and trust on the local organizations as well, giving that fund directly to them and trusting their capacities as well. The other theme was innovation for adaptation, and the big shout on the room was, we have done a lot of fancy pilots, a lot of work has been done. There was a lot of things going on, but we need to now move from these fancy pilots and innovations to scaling out and scaling up, which should be locally led. Because if we bring a new system on the ground and we don't know the technologies, we can move ahead and we can fail. So it should be locally led, it should be locally integrated, and we should recognize how to scale it up more generally. The other is enabling environments, the finance, regulations, policies, and community engagement to work together to foster successful locally relevant adaptation. I've already covered that. And there was a lot of discussion on intermediaries and the role of intermediaries. And most of the conclusion come around the intermediaries should work as a broker of knowledge. They need to work on as build capacities and as broadcasters of learning. And the final was the youth. And the youth leadership, the key message on youth leadership was the youth leadership should not only focus on big events like CBA or COP events, like advocacy and influencing on the COP, but also on the ground. Or they need to be a pillar on community-led policies, intervention, and community-led actions, so that the youth is not only seen as a protester, but as an asset for the community itself. And also to have these intergenerational dialogues, and the youth funding should have been as a direct access to youth funding, rather than the NGO and INGO have a sub-component as youth, and they just pilot the youth part. But the youth programs should be more standalone youth programs as well. So that was the key message. Sorry if I haven't read it through, I just remember and just saying it because Helen already said the time is up. That's all from my side. If there's anything more you want to discuss, I'm open to conversation. So thank you, Helen. Thank you, everyone.
That is fantastic. Thank you so much, Sushila. That was a lot of information. I know you had a lot to try and distill there, so thank you very much. And I think lots of positive comments I can see in the chat as well about the work that you've done in transferring those key messages so well. There were quite a few questions in the chat. I'm going to take a few minutes maybe to kind of I'm going to put one question to you both to start with, and you know, feel free to kind of come in on that. So the question was around decolonisation of climate action, and whoever wants to answer this, essentially a question around whether decolonising climate action is possible without decolonising climate finance. And so given the discussions at CBA, I don't know whether Sushila, you want to start, and then Sara, if you want to add anything. So maybe I'll hand to you, Sushila.
Yeah, thank you so much, Helen. Yeah, it was one of the key discussions as well. We are not talking about only actions. The actions itself come up with finance, with technologies and innovations and everything together. So the action is a package of everything together in my understanding, and I think it's the understanding of the CBA community as well. And the big thing that's come on the decolonization theme was, are the decolonizing theme coming from the colonial pattern as well? Like, are we telling decolonization from a global South perspective, or people from the North are coming again and saying like, you have to decolonize now? So there was a lot of debate and discussion. It was really a healthy conversation and argument on how we want to go ahead with the decolonization. And it was a very new topic, so we were open to emotional conversations as well, sharing our personal experience on decolonization as well. So we need a lot of support from you all to make this a more strong in near future, organizing some webinars as well. Some of the comments were that we need to organize more webinars so that we can think beyond, like, what is the decolonizing climate action should we look like, and how to make actually happening it in the next CBA maybe.
Fantastic, thank you, Sushila. Sara, did this issue around decolonisation also come up during the Gobeshona conference? Is there anything to build on what Sushila has said?
Yeah, I would actually echo with what Sushila just mentioned. I do feel they both are interlinked and can mutually reinforce each other. It can be judged on the basis of how localization and empowerment are being looked upon. So yeah.
Great, thank you, Sara. I can see lots of stuff in the chat, and so just to both speakers afterwards, you might want to go through as well. There's some other questions you might want to have a look at, including one which I think is quite specific, Sara, for you and colleagues in Bangladesh around around the performance-based grants mechanism. So I'll let you have a look in the chat there for that question. But another question that was raised was around an interesting kind of what you think perhaps Europe could learn from some of the experiences and the messages that came out. I mean, maybe if there's one thing from the discourse that you've had, is there anything you'd like to say this could be useful for Europe in terms of supporting and enabling transformational adaptation action in Europe?
Thank you. I believe the communities that have already implemented the principles of transformational adaptation can offer valuable insights and lessons to European region and communities, and countries from the Southern Asia like Bangladesh could be a great example. Community engagement and participation could be something that could be taken into account. We by now know how the youths are building capacity amongst local communities here to be more adaptive and resilient. So this could be something that the European countries which are now starting to implement the adaptation strategies can learn from our region.
Fantastic, thanks, Sara. Sushila.
Just to add, yeah, thank you, Sara. It was wonderfully captured. Just to add on that, we were saying always that the Global South are the victims of climate change, but now we have already heard everything from everyone in the panels that everybody is seeing the effect on their ground. Everybody is now thinking like the time has come where we need to start adapting rather than waiting for only funding for the Global South, but it's time for the European context as well to start with designing how to see the future and how to adapt in the system they had already set up. And most of these are like the urban settlements, so the urban NBS systems that are piloted on the global south countries initially are a great learning tools for the north. And we say, like, it's not like the north have a knowledge and the south have to do it. It's like we need to go hand in hand, and it needs to be respected that the knowledge and experience we brought from working on adaptation for quite a long time, it's the right time for we being an expert coming to the Europe and delivering, like, this is the way we need to do the adaptation work on ground.
Thank you. Thank you both very much. I'm going to ask 2 questions, and then both of you can either just choose which one you feel. I think this is the last chance for a question, so I'm going to give you 2 at one time, and then feel free, you can answer both of them or just the one. So we had 2 questions. One question which was, how does essentially the working with the existing system apply to fragile states, conflict affected areas, essentially? For example, I think the example of Myanmar is given in the conversation. So is there anything we can learn, or any questions that are being looked at with regard to that question? And then secondly, I think another question around both Gobeshona and CBA, participants talked about the importance of recognizing the value of vertically connected, governance layers. So the local to national or regional, depending on where you are, and incentivizing collaboration across those. Do you think that we should adjust the language of Principle 8 to make this more explicit? And I will try the language of Principle 8 up. I think the principles are on the slide somewhere, so I'll get those shown up so you can remember what the exact language is. Just feel free, you can answer both of them or neither of them if you feel like it.
I can go first and Sara can join then. For the conflict affected region, I don't have an experience working on a conflict region, so I can't say about the case of Myanmar, but in general, I can speak about, like, Nepal was also one of the conflict affected region for quite a long time, but still it was not against the government, so the things were different. So I can't say exactly on a Myanmar context, but yeah, working on a conflict is a very crucial thing, because there is a very thin line between what you are doing that will hamper the issues and then move ahead. So there should be a integration of how the conflict has arose and how climate change can enhance the conflict as well. So we need to be very careful on designing our work as well around the conflict. And working with government is, as I say, is one of the key things, because the government is only a body which is fully accountable for their people, if it's an elected or a systemized thing. If that's not the case for Myanmar, I know, so that's a different issue. But working together in the leadership of government is the way to go ahead, because it's elected by the people and they are there for the people's voice. So they should be accountable and responsible for all the efforts they put on climate arena. So that was my opinion when I was speaking about it. So yeah, that's the thing I want to stay on.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Sushila, and thank you for your presentation. Sara.
With Sushila on this. Yeah, actually, what we are doing are for the local people, and if they are not included, if they are excluded from our, plans and decision making, so it wouldn't be a success, I believe. So yeah, it's of course important that they are included in the investments we make, and a collaborative action is taken.
Fantastic. Thank you both. As I said, there are more questions in the chat, and there's quite some sort of rich discussion. It's, it is difficult to try and follow it all whilst also trying to kind of focus on the conversation. But please do have a look. There's a lot of rich questions in there for you. what we are going to do now is, in the build up to CBA, there was a video, I'm going to call it a competition. Essentially, we asked community groups and organisations from across the CBA community to come up with some short videos around what community-led climate action looked like in their countries or regions. So we had 2 videos which won, I think one of them won the vote. There were some various votes that took place, and so we wanted to show these 2 videos. In the interest of time, because we're conscious that we gave a little bit more time there just to hear some of the answers to the questions, we'll show one. While that's running, if you can just put in the chat a thumbs up if you're happy to go on until, it would be in the UK, it would be 3:05, so that we can show the second video. They're both 5 minutes each. If you'd rather not, so that you can leave and listen to the discussion, we will only show one. So it's a bit of voting here, a bit of democratization. So please, if you can, move to the first video and please enjoy. We've got a 5-minute video from Canary.
I'm Nellie Richards. I'm the director with the St. Catherine Community Development Agency. We have been operating since 1996. We started as a child-focused organization, started with the Canada Save the Children Fund. We work in several communities, 9 communities to be exact, in St. Catherine. We use an integrated approach to working with the residents. In 2019, SACNA received grant funding from the Jeff Small Grants Program, and we implemented this intervention in the Princessfield community. We partner with the Caribbean Maritime University, and we train a number of youngsters.
My name is Navada Palmer, and I'm one of the trainees from the St. Catherine Development Agency, where I do LED assembly. I started off in 2014, where I learned how to retrofit and do assembly on LED bulbs, and also in the LED tubes. Back then, in 2014, when I just started off, I started here in Commodore, in the Princessfield area of St. Catherine, Livingston to be exact. I furthered my studies in Caribbean Maritime University at the time. After, we do another course here in Princessfield, where we do a 1-week training, and after that, I was one of the head of the class. So in this course, I have learned a lot. I learned how to put things together, dealing with LEDs and also outside of LEDs, because LED lights is more reliable. One thing with LED lights, you can touch it without getting burned. If it stops working, it's safe also to remove. It's safe. No electrocution.
It turned out to be very impactful, because any of the youngsters that receive the training can do so on their own. They can create their own source of employment. And we found out that the guys were very marketable, because quite a bit of them find jobs, not necessarily in that field, but to work with internet company and different computer companies. We have been using solar power to run this lab since we started in 2019. It helps us to reduce our carbon footprints and hence mitigate against climate change. As a matter of fact, we have been using solar power and another project here since 2014, and until today we have not paid one JPS bill, because it carries its own power and it served the factory very well.
dampak perubahan iklim di desa ini terjadi panas berkepanjangan, lalu gelombang pasang terjadi abrasi, gagal panen, dan sumur kering. Dan itu yang dampaknya gagal panen itu, ya bagi masyarakat itu gagal panen. Ya. Nama saya Istakius Rafael Suban, biasa dipanggil Pak Rafael. Nah, saya sebagai tokoh masyarakat dan juga sebagai kepala desa di sini. Dan Muro itu sebenarnya sudah secara turun-temurun. Muro itu adalah daerah-daerah tertentu, perairan tertentu, ada batasan-batasan tertentu, itu dilarang, tidak bisa diambil hasil biota lautnya sembarang. Ada Muro itu ada seperti konservasi, itu sudah secara turun-temurun. Ya, peran perempuan ya. Ketika Muro itu dari hasil laut itu kalau ketika ditangkap, perempuan juga terlibat, kita sama-sama menangkap. Nah, itu peran perempuan. Jadi secara ekonomi, mereka mendapat hasil lautnya dari Muro, lalu dijual. Nah, bagi saya, mereka mendapat pendapatan bertambah. Selama ini upaya kita, ya, kita buat terumbu karang buatan. Biorestek kita untuk ganti terumbu karang yang rusak. Kalau di laut, di laut ini selain kita biorestek, kita juga tanam mangrove. Upaya yang telah kami lakukan ialah penghijauan di mata air, lalu kita tanam buah-buahan di pohon buah-buahan di kebun sebagai pangan alternatif, dan juga kita lestarikan Muro di laut dan di darat sebagai upaya untuk mempertahankan pangan lokal kita. Tantangan kita selama ini ialah ada pelaku-pelaku tertentu yang memakai sarana yang kurang bersahabat dengan lingkungan, seperti potas, bom. Tantangan kalau kita di darat itu pola kebun berpindah-pindah. Tebas, bakar, berkebun tahun ini, tahun berikut pindah lagi. Tantangan dalam COVID ini ada saja. Maka upaya-upaya kita untuk melakukan kerja secara gotong royong juga dibatasi. Nah, itu yang menjadi kesulitan kita. Itu kalau di Lembata dan di desa dan kampung ini lembaga berakat yang memang memberikan pendampingan kita. Dukungan pemerintah itu ialah memberikan dukungan dengan dikeluarkannya SK. Nah, itu hukumnya itu sudah ada. Bagi saya sumber daya alam yang ada ini harus tetap kita pertahankan. Motivasi saya itu rakyat itu harus nikmati ya hasil sumber daya alam yang ada. Muro ini dan ini harus terus berjalan, terus berlanjut dan dijaga. Itu harapan saya.
Fantastic, thank you. I hope you enjoyed those two short videos that give you a flavour, I suppose, of some of the work from across the world that many of our partners and colleagues on the community-based adaptation are helping to deliver. In the interest of time, I'm going to move straight over to the second panel discussion, which I would very much like to, I can see as well, sorry, put the link to the videos and more videos in the chat. So I just want to draw your attention to that in case you'd like to watch them again in slower time or a longer selection. I'd like to hand over now to Salim. Very grateful, Salim, to have you here on this call. We've had a powerful voice at the start. We have a powerful voice now and some powerful voices on the panel as well. So I'm going to hand over to you for the panel discussion. We've probably got about 20-25 minutes maximum, so that we've got 5 minutes to close. Fantastic. Thank you, Salim. Over to you.
Great. Thank you very much, Helen, and good afternoon to everybody for this second dialogue, which is going to take us out of the local to the global. And just to frame this conversation a little bit going forward, the two conferences that we just heard about in the first session, namely Gobeshona, which took place in the early part of the year in March, and then Gobeshona, which took place in May in Bangkok. Gobeshona was a completely 100% online conference, global conference. CBA 17 was an in-person conference after many years of COVID restrictions. We came back. It's the 17th conference that has been held every year for 17 years. And third element in this annual calendar is the global event every year at the Conference of Parties. So we have a Gobeshona conference in the early part of the year. We have a CBA conference in the middle part of the year. And then we plan to take the messages from these local actors and local researchers and local level policymakers, practitioners, to the global level at the COP. And the next COP is going to be obviously COP28, which will be in December in Dubai. So I'm now going to invite three very distinguished panelists to share some thoughts on how they see us making those connections from the local to the global. And then hopefully we'll have a little bit of time for some interactive questions. If you have questions for them, please feel free to put them in the chat. So I'll introduce all three of them first, and then I'll invite the first speaker to go for about 5 minutes or so. So the first speaker is going to be Sara, who is with Save the Children UK. Second, we have Ameil Harikishun from South North in South Africa. And thirdly, we have Kamila Gojobe from Slum International, Kenya. I'll start with Sara. Sara, would you like to kick us off 5 minutes or so, if that's all right?
Yeah, thanks so much, Salim. And first, Eid Mubarak to all those celebrating Eid al-Adha, and I hope you have a joyous week. I might start just by giving a couple of reflections from those two videos we saw, and then kind of leading some of those initial thoughts into where are we now, and where do we need to be, and what does it look like on the road to COP28? I think for me, just thinking about that last video, what really struck me with the sort of beautiful description of the muro from Mr. Raphael was that they've been doing locally led adaptation in that island in Indonesia for generations. So this isn't new for communities like the one Mr. Raphael is leading. You can see from the video that the myriad of climate issues that are hitting that community: harvest failure, crop failure, dried up wells, the heat, which has a whole host of myriad of impacts on health and education. So these are tried and tested multi-generational adaptation approaches that they know work. But what he did say was that there are limitations, the efforts are limited just because of the scale that's needed and the myriad of problems that they now face. And so I think that's one thing to think. We think about these principles being quite new, and that so many, as we heard at the very start of the presentation, so many people on this call and beyond have worked so hard to socialize these principles. But for lots of communities, locally led adaptation isn't new, but we're now at a precipice where if we don't take these to scale, we all know the not only now, but in the future, the awful consequences if these don't get scaled up. And then I think, secondly, the first video we saw with Nelly and in Jamaica, I think that was just really interesting to hear her talk about the integrated approach and the fact that this was actually a child-focused organization for many years, and just the level of knowledge and understanding, not only on climate, but through the whole community in all its contexts, that really helps to not have maladaptation and really understand the community needs. And that can really only be effective when you have communities that driving seats. So those were some of my reflections from the videos, are really powerful. And then looking at where are we now, I think, we heard at the beginning that I think 100 organizations, more than 100 organizations now have endorsed these 8 principles, which is fantastic. And if you look at the types of organizations that have endorsed the principles, it's a whole host of really critical organizations, from bilateral governments to some of the, not all, but some of the key multilaterals, lots of intermediaries or INGOs, if we want to call them that, and of course, the communities themselves. So we've got, everyone has the logo, or lots of people have the logo, everyone has signed up. We've all agreed that this is the right thing to do. So, but we're not where we want to be. And I think my challenge to people here representing intermediaries and representing multilaterals and potentially bilaterals as well is that we've signed up to these principles, but if we just sign up and put it on our website without fundamentally thinking about what we need to change in order to deliver it, then we could still be in a position in a few years' time when we're still talking about, well, accountability and how do we implement the principles? Because it's not enough just to sign up. We have to look, what does it mean to devolve decision making? What does it mean when we talk about flexible programming? What does it actually mean when we want transparency? And the flip side of saying we want that, the quid pro quo, as it were, is that we all need to change our quote unquote business as usual model to a business unusual model in order to actually facilitate that. It won't happen if all of us don't look to see how each of us needs to apply those principles and actually, what do we need to change? What processes do we need to change? Because just agreeing with the principles and saying they're fantastic won't actually get us to where we are. So I suppose that would be my biggest challenge for all of us, is to let's take them back to our organizations. Let's look about why isn't it working and what do we need to do to actually devolve decision making, to actually think about how do we do flexible programming if all our systems and processes are the antithesis of flexibility, which is the reality for lots of us. I'll stop there and go back to you, Salim. I might have further reflections.
Excellent, Sara. I'll come back to you after we hear from the other 2 speakers. So let me now move to Ameil, who has been very active, particularly in the resilience hubs at the last COPs in Glasgow and in Sharm el-Sheikh. And that has been a very useful and, in my view, innovative mechanism to bring these local voices to this global forum. Ameil, would you like to share some of your experience and how we can take that forward?
Great, thanks so much, Salim, and hello everyone. Eid Mubarak to those that are celebrating. It's a pleasure to be with you here today to share some thoughts on this. And as we build up to COP28, I think we share a lot of the narrative of the need to amplify community voices and local voices into the global space. And something at a very personal level that I constantly try and reflect on is, whose voices are we actually amplifying, and what does that mean in practice? So if we are speaking on behalf of communities or on behalf of local actors, are we really amplifying those voices, or are we really challenging the spaces that we work in at a global level to actually carve out space for these more local level voices? Salim, as you refer to them often as local adapters, are we carving out space and transforming those dialogues to actually have people be empowered and have their agency recognized to advocate for themselves? Salim, you mentioned the Resilience Hub. I think that is a particular space at COP that a number of different organizations, including ICCCAD and South-South North, the Global Resilience Partnership, and others, are also trying to probe that question and creating a space at global platforms like COP28 to try and meaningfully and authentically engage this question around what amplification means. So I'm the finance thematic lead for a program at South-South North called the Climate and Development Knowledge Network, just reflecting on a number of the comments made in the chat, as well as the amazing summary provided by Sara and Sushila on the two conferences. I think a number of very important questions being raised about funding and finance, and Sara, you touched on this as well. One thing for me that I'm holding front in mind when moving into COP28 is really asking us the question is, how do we transition the paradigm that communities and local level actors are beneficiaries towards seeing them as critical partners for inclusive and transformative climate action? And I think when we probe this question and we start asking, as Sara pointed out, the practicalities of how we do this, I think we can start seeing some valuable entry points for the COP28 discussions that will take place around how we start to transform the global, regional, national, and subnational climate finance architectures. Because first and foremost, what that question poses to us is that we need to understand what medium and long-term dedication and commitment to these critical partners in inclusive and transformative climate action looks like. We're speaking about trust. We're talking about valuing the solutions, knowledge, and agency of these communities. And I think when we see these local level actors as critical partners, it really, I think, pushes us out of that space of just trying to provide money and seeing them as beneficiaries. We're really acknowledging, first and foremost, the agency and the power that they hold to create the change in their own lives and their own communities that they want to see. And so that's something for me at a very personal level, but also for South-South North and CDKN, that we're taking in as a framing for how we want to ally with these actors at a local level so that they can amplify their own voices into these global forums. When chatting to colleagues from the UNFCCC around how we get these more local level and grassroots level voices into these global processes and these spaces, I think they pointed something out to me that I've been thinking about a lot. They said that they acknowledge that these voices are so incredibly important, but when you bring things into these geopolitical global spaces or processes rather in negotiations, often that granularity that comes from these more on the ground experiences of climate action get lost. And so there's a critical need for all of us as a community to really unpack how we broker the reality on the ground into these global processes in ways that are actionable, communicating with negotiators and governments around how we take that reality on the ground and embed it into the decisions that are being made. And Salim, I know that you're very active in the loss and damage space and are really a champion on understanding how we ally with local communities on the loss and damage question. That is the other side of the coin of locally led adaptation. Things we're also considering as well, which is how do we holistically consider the locally led adaptation principles and finance them holistically? We can't necessarily just cherry pick principles. I think we really need to understand and practice how these principles are applied, and we need to broker knowledge across various different stakeholders with communities and local actors at the heart of that discussion on what this holistically means in practice. These principles will not be holistically put into practice if they are not owned and understood by local adapters, by communities, by subnational and local government, etc., etc. So I think in moving into these global spaces, keeping some of these framings in mind, for me at least, is at the heart of what we need to be building up to COP28. There's a lot of interesting comments being made in the chat, and I look forward to some further questions around how we can ally with one another, but first and foremost, how do we ally with these local adapters? Thanks, Salim.
Great, thank you very much, Ameil, for those excellent suggestions on how do we take things forward. Now I'd like to invite Kamila Gojobe from Kenya. Kamila, you're a grassroots activist working with Slum Dwellers International in Kenya. but you've also had the chance to go to these global events. How do you see the connection? How, in your opinion, is it useful to go to them? And if so, how do you make the most of being able to attend these global events? Kamila, over to you.
Hi, hi Salim, thank you so much. My name is Kamila Gojobe, a community organizer with Slum Dwellers International Kenya. And to answer that, I think yes, having local community at the global conversation is really useful. And personally, I think even being at the CBA, that is what we were championed for, having local voice out there, having community voice out there. And I think even moving forward to the future COPs, I think having diverse community, that is the local voice there, because I believe the local people have many solutions. As we have seen in the videos, we can see them telling whatever they've been affected by the climate change, how they're coming up with the solutions. We need them to be there, represented on the global conversation, not just represented, but having that voice, telling their own stories and showing their own solution. And I believe even that is what we was discussing at the CPA. One of the things that I learned too was within local solutions, it doesn't mean that we have our own solutions and we cannot have that support by our own. So being on the global conversation means I have to share my knowledge, the practitioners, NGOs, we all share our knowledge, and that is how we'll build up more change from local up to upwards. So we can't have just local dealing with their own solutions and other people dealing with their solution. We need to come together, and this global conversation is where we're coming with these ideas, these agenda, these solutions. And also, when we talk about, most of the time in these conferences and conversations, we'll have people saying the youth are represented, the urban youth are represented, the community are represented, but they aren't really represented. So when we say yes, we need them actually to be there. We need to hear the voice. We need to show how they're creating awareness in their communities, how they're engaging in different activities. But also, again, another question to ask ourselves is, by them being there, by them being represented, does it mean they meet to the decision-making table? Because we have those big people who sit at the decision table and they grab all these opportunities, but we also want not only them being represented at the global conversation, but also them being able to be part of the decision-making table, to grab this opportunity their own, to tell their own stories on the decision-making table, to come up, to tell the solutions so that we can have that exchange of knowledge, and so that they can bring more change to the local communities. Yes, to you back, Salim.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Kamila, for that excellent intervention. So we're coming close to the end of our time. I'm going to ask each of you a question, but before I do that, I want to give a little bit of a framing of how one can become more effective beyond token participation in these global events. And I'll start with the national level. It is very important that the local communities engage with your own national governments, because in the UNFCCC process, we don't have a seat at the table. Our governments have a seat at the table, and the governments have to be speaking on our behalf. And if we aren't telling our governments what to say, the governments won't say it. So our first level of advocacy has to be at the national level. We must reach out to our governments, reach out to our parliamentarians, reach out to our local politicians, and get the messages going from the bottom to the central government, to the negotiators. If nowadays a number of countries also take negotiators from young youth negotiators, for example, if we can nominate a youth negotiator to be part of the government delegation, a number of governments are now doing that. So that is another way to get inside into the table, as you said, with the decision makers and build relationships with them. So that's one level. That's at the country level before you even think of going to the COP. The second level, I would say, is at the COP, there are multiple ways of working. The first one is networking. It's a tremendous networking opportunity, but it's a difficult place to network because there are thousands of things happening, tens of thousands of people there. How do you connect to them? So we have made some progress on that. I mentioned the Resilience Hub that Ameil has been organizing or co-organizing with a number of partners. That's a great place to get together. There is also a locally led adaptation hub, a smaller hub, not as big as the Resilience Hub, which ICCCAD helps organize together with UNCDF, which can also be used. So we have that hub event. People can organize events for networking. That's for getting like-minded people together from around the world, because the opportunity is there are like-minded people from all over the world at the COP, and we want to find them. We want to network with them. And that's an opportunity to do that networking, but we have to do it in a planned way, not just appear in the COP and then look for people. You won't find them easily that way. And then the third and final lobbying and advocacy is in the official negotiation process. And there are two aspects of the official negotiations which is relevant for us in the LLA. One is climate finance, adaptation finance, enhancing the level of adaptation financing overall, and then within adaptation finance, enhancing the allocation to locally led adaptation specifically by donors who are going to be funding. That's one avenue of advocacy. The second avenue of advocacy for those of a more theoretical or academic bent is on the global goal on adaptation. This is now something that's being discussed, and we are working, those of us who are more academics and researchers, on incorporating, not necessarily having a separate goal on locally led adaptation, but whatever the global goal on adaptation is, it must have an element of a locally led adaptation built into that goal. Just having a global goal by itself is not going to be enough, and we will be advocating for that. So I'm going to ask each of you to maybe very briefly say what it is that you think would be best for you to take forward between now and December when the COP happens, and then we can do follow-up conversations after today's event on that. And I'll go in the same order as before: Sara, and then Ameil, and then Kamila. Sara?
Yeah, thanks, Salim, and also for those brilliant messages on how to make the most of COP, which can be kind of overwhelming and all-encompassing. So thinking about trying to connect as much as possible with like-minded people and building those coalitions, and that I think is probably the key thing that for me, and thinking about where I work, Save the Children, is that we can't. Things are too urgent. This isn't about going it alone. It's about really trying to build all those coalitions, and as Kamila said, making sure that children and young people are not just there representing, but we're doing everything in our power to put you and your peer group front and center and give you opportunity for meaningful decision makers. So I'm really inspired. I was really delighted to meet you in Bangkok, and great hearing you today. And you re-inspire me to think about everything I can do to make sure that that it's incumbent on all of us to take your message and work as hard as possible between now and December to move that from the tokenistic representation to meaningful decision makers, because you're the future, and you've just reminded us again today.
Great, thank you very much, Sara. Ameil?
Thanks so much, Salim. Salim, you recall this, of course, because ICCCAD led the South Asia Regional Resilience Hub last year. But something that really stood out for me, and I think it really speaks to your point around local engaging with national before we start going to these global fora. Something that came out in particular with the approach that ICCCAD took with the South Asia Regional Resilience Hub was engaging directly with lesser heard and underrepresented constituencies and voices. And the feedback that came out with engaging with ICCCAD's engagement with a lot of these constituencies was, well, we're not being recognized or heard even by our own subnational and national government. Can you tell us what the benefit is of now going to speak or engage or have our voices amplified at a global level? And for me, I think that really hits home with what you just said. And so how do we ally with these global processes and meaningfully and authentically amplifying voices up there? But I think recognizing the reality for a lot of these local level adapters and voices, etc., that are marginalized by not just social and economic systems, but political systems as well. Something that I'm playing around with, and CDKN as a knowledge and innovation brokering program that's trying to bridge this knowledge to action gap, is to try and test more innovative and perhaps even more informal influencing approaches that it goes beyond just trying to bring warm bodies to COP. And I think sometimes we fall short of really pushing the envelope, because we think just because we include somebody to speak in a panel or we funded somebody to attend COP, that is actually meaningfully amplifying these voices into these spaces. And I mentioned this in my previous remarks around how do we try and bridge this gap between what negotiators and global processes speak to and the languages they speak to, and then taking the very rich granularity of local voices into those spaces. And so I think, you know, funding somebody to just get to COP so that they can just say something is very different to how that may actually be put into action and decisions. And so we're trying to push on a few opportunities that, you know, we might pilot at COP, and we're really trying to engage on more closed door meetings, engaging with these more grassroots and local level voices around, well, this is how things are spoken about in these global processes, but this is actually what it means. Where are the opportunities and docking points for how we can actually influence some of those decisions, some of the text, etc. And I think we're trying to grapple with some of those opportunities. I think, you know, going beyond just bringing warm bodies to COP, getting people speaking on panels or events. And it's quite a critical stance, but we'll see how it goes for COP28.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you very much. Kamila, last word to you. We are running out of time.
Yeah. So one of the things currently we're doing is creating a movement of young activists of the urban youth. So these youth are engaging in so many things on climate change. So we're trying to connect the local government with these communities to see what we can do fast within our government, and also seeing how we can amplify this conversation to other communities to learn from whatever we're doing, and also these youth to be on global spaces to discuss their own issues and their own solutions. Yeah.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you all, our excellent panelists. I'm afraid we've run out of time. There's quite a lot of discussion going on in the chat box, so I'd encourage people to respond to that, or we can always have these conversations offline. Before I close, let me just make two comments. Firstly, we run a course at my center in Bangladesh. It's an online course. It's called Following the COP Without Going to the COP. So there's this presumption that I have to go there to be able to do something. You don't. If you know what you're doing, you don't have to physically be there. You have to know how to influence the process. And that's what we teach. The other element to share with everybody is a new community of practice of young youth that is emerging, a global youth platform, which I'm associated with. And they're going to be having a major global conference in Tanzania in the first week of October. If anybody's interested in that, it's going to be hosted by the University of Dar es Salaam. I'd be very happy to share more information with you on that. And that's a community of practice of young people from around the world who are actually taking actions on the ground. With that, let me hand over to Helen to take us through the last few minutes. Helen.
Fantastic, thank you all very much. While I'm just talking, I'm going to ask Sam maybe to just put up the last Mentimeter slide for people to share an answer to the question, having heard the richness of the conversation today and the ideas, some great ideas there from the panel at the end. Just to put in a quick answer to the question about what you would like to see on locally led adaptation priorities for COP28. we're not going to get time to go into them all, I'm afraid, but I think it really helps to capture some of those thoughts. And just in terms of next steps, we are very interested in kind of looking at how we use COP28 to really focus on a number of issues, including the point that I think Sara and Christopher said, for example, around, okay, we've signed up to it. What are you doing? Like, who's doing what? You know, let's really be quite accountable and transparent about what we're doing, the challenges we all face, and the opportunities to do stuff better together. So if you're interested in some of these discussions, please do let us know, because we're really keen to continue this conversation with colleagues. I just want to thank everybody for participating today. I want to thank the panelists, in particular, all our speakers, for their great contribution. It's been a really, I think it's been a really valuable conversation with some great insights and ideas that have come through. We will be sharing a short, hopefully, fingers crossed, sharing a short summary of this discussion on our website, probably be at some point over the next week or so, including a video. We can share the video of this recording so that you can watch it in slower time. So please do continue to use the Menti to answer the question. Last big thank you to everybody for participation. We're only 5 minutes late, so it's not too awful. Thank you very much, and Eid Mubarak again for those who are celebrating around the world. Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.